Rural and remote communities are two significantly different things. So maybe in the questions and answers we could talk a little bit about some of the strategies that are unique to those different types of communities. I also want to give a bit of an overview of renewable energy as an industry in general, just to sort of set the context for where things are at globally, what's possible, what sort of the size of the prize is, and where things are going, and how things have changed in the last few years. And hopefully this isn't redundant for too many people here, but I did want to make sure that we're all aware, I guess, of where the industry is going and what some of the opportunities are. So a little bit about the Pembina Institute. We're a non-profit sustainable energy institute, and we do research, we do education, we do consulting, and we do advocacy. And so we're kind of a unique NGO in that we do consulting with organizations and with governments and with other nonprofit groups, but we also do advocacy at the same time. And so we kind of walk the line in between doing research as well as doing think tanks. We're independent and nonpartisan, and we are situated across the country. We started out in Alberta, and we've got 4 offices in Alberta. We've got an office here in Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, and Yellowknife. So we do try to walk that line between doing technical research as well as doing public policy advocacy as well as doing public education. We come from a rural town, or a small town in just outside of Edmonton, and this is our 25th year in existence because we were actually born out of a fairly nasty incident. One of Canada's worst industrial accidents is the Lodgepole blow-up you can see there, which was a sour gas well that exploded just outside of Edmonton. I think it burned for several months, and you could smell the sulfur apparently as far west as Winnipeg when that well blew out. So not as far east as Winnipeg. So a fairly nasty explosion and one of Canada's worst industrial accidents. And so what happened after that, obviously not on the scale of the Gulf of Mexico, but still not a great incident. But when that happened, a bunch of people got together in Alberta and they said, how can we make sure that something like this never happens again? So we were actually born out of a citizens group. A bunch of teachers got together and said, let's make sure that this stuff never happens again. And we became a bit of a watchdog, I guess, on oil and gas development in Alberta. And since then, we've moved on. We still do oil and gas research in Alberta in particular, but we also do a lot of sustainable energy policy issues across Canada. So a little bit about myself. I'm a mechanical engineer. My background is mechanical engineering, and I started doing my PhD research on wind power in remote communities in the Arctic. And what I wanted to do was looking at control systems for wind integrations and wind diesel hybrid systems. And as I got doing that research, I quickly realized that it wasn't technology that really was the problem in stopping the development of these the deployment of these systems. It really was policy that was getting in the way, and it was policies that were slowing down the deployment of these systems. And so I realized that it wasn't the most efficient use of my time to continue in the technical area, but for the last 8 years I've been doing more policy research and policy development because that really is really the area that facilitates all this development. And so that's, I think, true at a small level or a remote level where I originally started, as well as at a broader level nationally. So that's our webpage, and most of the work that we do is available for download, and you can just put that up there for your reference. You can see the breadth of work that we work on, from oil sands issues to wind energy to international financing for climate change. I think one thing that's a little bit unique about what we do at the Pembina Institute is that we actually do work directly with communities. And these are some examples of projects that we've actually worked with. Some of those are in remote communities, looking at actual deployment of renewable energy technology. So you can see in the top photos, the left and the right photos, we're putting in stream gauges, looking at small hydro systems, and the bottom left is consultation with communities, and then these other two are installing wind towers, so looking at monitoring the wind in those particular communities. So we do have some experience on the ground in terms of actually helping to develop some of these projects. And in doing that, we've also had experience in what can go wrong. And you can see that's a photograph of a wind tower that was collapsed because someone who was supposed to maintain the guy wires decided that he didn't want to go out and do it in the rain. And about 6 months later, the tower collapsed. So we have a good understanding of what some of the challenges are in working in rural communities as well. This is a list. It's probably a little bit outdated. of the different communities that we've worked with across Canada, and you can see a lot of them are First Nation and Northern communities, but certainly not exclusively. We've worked, some of those projects are working on actual renewable energy projects, other ones are just looking at energy inventories, energy baselines, those sorts of things. So we've done a mix of consulting with those communities. So that's a little bit about me, about the Institute, what we do. I'm gonna now talk a little bit about renewable energy in general, where we are globally, the importance of policy design, how that plays into the development of renewables, and then talk a little bit about the study that we actually did for the Department of Agriculture, looking at barriers as well as programs that are out there internationally, and then some conclusions. So obviously the reason we're doing this is the urgency of climate change, the climate change crisis. And I think one thing I don't want to dwell on this, but the one thing I do want to point out is that there's often people say there's uncertainty in the science, and we're hearing some skeptics talk about that at times. But I think when you understanding that statement, there certainly is uncertainty in science, and everyone who understands science knows that there's uncertainty in any science. But I think what's important is that that statement cuts both directions, and in fact, the worst case scenarios that they predicted for climate change have actually underpredicted the warming we've already seen. And so when there's uncertainty, it can also mean that things are worse than what we think they're going to be. And so that's actually what we've seen to date, is that the warming we've seen on the planet has been worse than the worst case scenarios predicted by the IPCC. So I don't want to dwell on that, but I just wanted to sort of set the stage, because that is really one of the main drivers for renewable energy. In Canada, we like to think of our electricity system as being fairly clean, and by relative terms it is, in terms of comparing ourselves to the United States. We've got about 60% of our power comes from hydropower, but we still have about a fifth of our power, about a quarter of our power comes from fossil fuels, and about a fifth of our national grid comes from coal. And that's responsible for about 16 or 17% of our overall national emissions, and so it's still a huge wedge of emissions that are coming from the electricity sector. And so even though in relative terms we have a fairly clean system, there still is a major area that we need to clean up. Particularly as we're starting to talk about putting new things onto the grid, whether it's electric cars, or ground source heat pumps, or air source heat pumps. The importance of a clean electricity system is one that grows. In fact, this is a slide we looked at in Alberta, and you can see that what it shows is the relative emissions from electricity in Alberta. This is Alberta only, but looking at the emissions in Alberta from oil sands as well as from the coal-based electricity system in the province. And you can see that obviously the growth in emissions in oil sands is growing, but currently the amount of emissions coming from the coal system are roughly equivalent to the oil sands in Alberta. And so oil sands obviously attract a lot of attention, and probably rightly so, and they're growing pretty quickly, so that's going to change. But the point I want to make is that generation of coal power generation really is a significant problem that also needs to be seriously addressed. The good news is we do have technologies that can address it, and the renewable energy really has come a long way in the last few years. And you can see from this graph, this is the amount of installed wind power just in the last 10 years or so, just how quickly the industry has changed, going from almost non-existent in the mid-90s to close to a tenfold increase within 10 years.